G'day Gear Junkies, Jason here. Following on from some of the other videos I've done on some famous Boss series of pedals, today we're going to be looking at a lot of yellow pedals that feature the acronym OD, or Overdrive. But just to be clear, I will not be talking about the SD pedals. We will do these in a separate video, just for the time constraints. And I also won't be featuring the OS2 because this fits somewhere between the OD series and the DS series. So I'll find somewhere to put this, but not in this video today. But before I get too far into this video, if you like this kind of content, please help me out by subscribing. Boss have had an OD pedal in their catalogue ever since 1977 when they first dropped the Compact series of pedals. The Compact series started off with 3 pedals. It was the SP1 Spectrum, the PH1 Phaser, and the OD1 Overdrive. This was a real landmark in pedals because it was the first widely available soft clipping overdrive pedal on the market. Here's my clean sound. I'm playing my PRS Custom 24 going into my Fender Deluxe Reverb. So it's completely clean. There is a little bit of reverb from the amp. Now I will switch to using a dirty amp as well for this video. Now because this is a really old OD1 from the 70s, it has a momentary LED, which means that the light will not stay on. It's also worth pointing out that because this is a very old pedal, it runs off 12 volts, not 9 volts, so this is actually running off a 12 volt adapter. Now it's very hard to downplay the importance of this design. Although it was very simple by today's standards, it's the basis of the tube screamer design of overdrives and also kind of like a parent or grandparent of the bluesbreaker style of pedals as well. So this was a massively influential design. Let's turn up the gain a bit more. Now because the OD1 shaves off a bit of bottom end and a bit of top end and also has a bit of the clean signal mixed in as well, people figured out that if you had an already overdriven or distorted amplifier, putting one of these in front of it helps just to tighten things up. So I'm going to play it now in front of my Marshall DSL-40 on the classic gain channel, so it's going to be a bit overdriven, and I'm going to whack this on and it's going to really tighten it up for single note lines. Recently, I did a video called 7 Things to Know When Buying Vintage Boss Pedals. And in that video, I spoke about the OD1 and I spoke about how there were different versions of the OD1. The most famous 2 versions being the 14-pin op-amp chip version, which it originally came out with, and the 8-pin version that it finished production with. Now, in terms of money value, the 14-pin op-amp chip versions, which came out from 77 through to the end of 79, are incredibly valuable on the second-hand market. These are worth about 3 times the amount as an 8-pin version. Funnily enough, I got these 2 for about the same price. Now in that video, I promised that I would shoot these 2 pedals out so that we could hear if there's any difference between the 14-pin version and the 8-pin version. So I've got both pedals in an independent loop, each of the JHS switchback. I have the original 14-pin chip one in the red channel, and I have the 8-pin chip version in the green channel. So they're both on. So here's what they sound like back to back. If I'm honest, I'm actually a little bit disappointed. I didn't think there was much of a difference, if at all, between these two pedals. They were almost identical. The only one thing that I could pick out was that the 8-pin version was a little bit brighter than the 14-pin version, but realistically, they pretty much sound identical. The OD-1 was produced from 1977 through till 1985. This period of time is all within the Japanese era. That means that every single one of these was made in Japan. This particular one I bought off the original owner, who bought it in early 1980, and I dated it to November of 1979. Boss did do a limited re-release of the OD-1 as part of the Traffic Light series for their 40th anniversary in 2017. In 1978, Boss bring out the DS1. This uses a 3-knob layout. By 1980, they start to replace some of their 2-knob pedals with pedals that use this 3-knob layout. In 1981, they bring out the successor to the OD-1, which is the Super Overdrive SD1. This pedal should have been called the OD-2, but they decided to give it the name Super Overdrive and gave it its own acronym SD1. Circuit-wise, it is basically an updated version of the OD-1. The two are very closely related. Brian Wampler did a whole episode on the similarities between some of their overdrive circuits. By 1983, Boss had settled on 2 different 4-knob formats that they would use for most of the pedals that they would bring out over that 8-year period from 1983 through to 1991. So they would either use 4 controls or 3 controls and a mode selector. Any pedals that they had that predated these would be moved into the new format. By the mid-80s, Boss were ready to bring out a new overdrive that fit this new format. So in 1985, they released the OD2 Turbo Overdrive. This has 3 knobs and a mode selector. What this pedal was able to give you was 2 different variants of overdrive. With the turbo off, it's kind of like an SD1. With the turbo on, it is much higher gain than a standard overdrive, and you lose a lot of that blended clean signal, and you just have more of the dirty signal. It's actually closer to a distortion than an overdrive. All right, here's the OD2 with the turbo off. And with the turbo on, all right, let's turn the turbo back off again, turn up the gain. And we'll put the turbo back on. Now again, I'm running this through a clean amplifier, and I'm doing that so that you can hear what the overdrive from the pedal sounds like on its own. But just like the OD-1, I actually reckon this sounds better in front of a dirty amp. So this is what it sounds like in front of my Marshall DSL-40. Now the OD2 was produced from 1985 through to 1994. It was produced in both Japan and Taiwan, and it was replaced in 1994 by the OD-2r. Now this is almost exactly the same pedal, but it has a couple of updates. One of them being the remote jack, just like the DS2 here. So you can now toggle between the turbo mode being on or off. But the biggest criticism of the original pedal was that there was a big volume difference between the two modes, with the turbo mode actually being a bit softer because it was more compressed. So they were able to fix that problem with the OD2r. Now have the OD2 and the OD2r both plugged into a channel each of the switchback. So you can hear there's a massive difference in volume between the two. The OD2r is a fair bit louder, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. All right, let's kick it into turbo mode. They sound very similar. I thought the OD2r sounded a little bit more crisp, but that could be because there was a bit of a volume boost between the normal mode and the turbo mode. I'll demonstrate that now. So maybe that crispness is just that little bit of extra volume on it, but they are very, very similar. The OD2r stayed in production from 1994 through to 1999. In 1991, we see the next major development in Boss pedals, which was the concentric pots. In that year, they released 3 new pedals using the concentric pots, the PQ4, the CE5 Chorus Ensemble, and the MT2 Metal Zone. All of these pedals have at least one of these concentric pots. What this allows Boss to do is to add more controls onto their pedals. So the Metal Zone, for example, has 6 controls. This was previously not something they were able to do. This kicks off a new era in Boss pedals, which I call the tweakability era, for obvious reasons, because the focus really was on how tweakable each pedal was and how flexible it could be. Now, the only overdrive pedal that Boss ever made using these concentric pots was the SD2 Dual Overdrive. This came out in 1993 and it has 7 controls. It has 2 levels, 2 tones, 2 gains, and a mode selector. Now, one of the problems I find with pedals of this era is that they tend to be a little bit too flexible in that it's harder to dial in a decent tone with a lot of them, or you find one tone that you like and you only tend to use that and you don't end up using a lot of the extra features. This pedal, on the other hand, is a really great pedal and I will cover it one day. But I just find pedals of this era were less intuitive than some of their simpler designs from back in the late 70s and early 80s. Strangely though, in the middle of the tweakability era, in 1995, Boss releases a new overdrive pedal and they've stripped it back and made it much simpler to use. I am, of course, talking about the BD2 Blues Driver. This is the first pedal in well over 10 years that uses the classic 3-knob layout, which means that it's a lot easier to dial in a good tone, and this pedal was a massive hit. So much so that 2 years later in 1997, Boss decided to bring out 3 new pedals, all using the classic 3-knob layout. We have the TR2 Tremolo, the FZ3 Fuzz, and their next offering in the overdrive line, which is the OD3. Now the OD3 here is an interesting pedal because it has a very complex design. Josh Scott once said that this is like a really refined tube screamer. Now I don't know if he's talking about the tone or the circuit. Tone-wise, I don't think it sounds much like a tube screamer at all because it's nowhere near as compressed. This is the first of the OD line to be very touch sensitive, which made it really popular with guitar players. The OD3 here is not as mid-rangey as, say, the SD1, and it doesn't have as much of the clean signal blended in as any of the other pedals that we've looked at so far. It does have a bit of tone shaping going on. It does tighten up your bottom end and your top end a bit, and the mid-range, it does have a bit of mid-range presence, but it's not sort of overbearing. That's why I think that this particular pedal is the best all-rounder out of all of them. This is the only one of these overdrive pedals that I would use for both rhythm and lead. The tone shaping on this makes it absolutely perfect for playing riffs from the 1970s. However, out of all these pedals, the OD3 was the one that I liked the least going into an already overdriving amplifier. The OD3 has been made ever since 1997 and it's still on the market today. I agree with Josh Scott that this is a criminally underrated pedal. The good thing about that though is you can pick them up secondhand really cheap. If you want to see some videos of someone really using this to its fullest potential, check out Michael Banfield's channel because he absolutely loves the OD3. In 2014, we see the start of a new era for Boss, which I call the retrospective era. And this is typified by Boss looking to the past for inspirations on their new designs. This was the year that the first Waza pedals first started coming out. But also that same year in 2014, Boss brought out two new pedals, the DS1x and the OD1x. Now these are kind of a crossover between the digital era and the retrospective era because these are both digital, but they both kind of owe a debt to the past. Here's the OD1x. I have the high and low controls and the drive control pretty much on 12 o'clock. Now, I wasn't expecting much of the OD1x being a digital pedal, but I was pleasantly surprised. I really like how the high and low controls are voiced. It's very, very musical. So it's not too thick and muddy in the bottom end, and it's not too shrill and harsh in the top end. So it's really well voiced for guitar. The gain control is a bit funny for me. It sounds pretty good when it's low or up to about medium, but it's not particularly touch responsive like the OD3. When you crank that gain up, it's got a fair bit of gain, but it's very, very smooth. It's almost kind of like a toothless tiger. For me, it's just not nasty enough. My biggest problem with digital drive pedals is they kind of just sort of sound like recorded tones, meaning that you can't really change how it sounds too much by injecting a bit of yourself into it. It all sort of comes out sounding fairly similar, and I find that is a bit of the case with this pedal, but it is quite smooth. And with the gain down a bit of delay and reverb, it sounds really good. I was also surprised that this actually sounded quite good going into an already overdriving amp. Now, it's been nearly 10 years since Boss last released a new overdrive pedal in their compact series, and I, for one, will be very interested to see what they come up with next. So please leave a comment below and tell me about your favourite Boss overdrives, and maybe tell me about the ones you never got along with as well. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can join the Middle Aged Gear Junkie Facebook page by clicking on the link in the description, and you can support this channel by going to the Middle Aged Gear Junkie store and buying some merchandise. Other than that, my name is Jason. Have a wonderful day. See you later.